Welcome to this McKinsey Global Institute virtual event.
Welcome everyone, I'm Chris Bradley, a Senior Partner and a Director of the McKinsey Global Institute. MGI was founded in 1990 and right from the start we've been studying country and sector level productivity. But today we're going to dive down to the fundamental unit of productivity, which is firms. And we're going to discuss our report, The Power of One, How Standout Firms Grow National Productivity. What we found turns conventional wisdom totally on its head. Our analysis shows that the lion's share of national productivity growth comes from the audacious moves of a few dozen standout firms. So rather than many firms moving just an inch, a few standout firms move many miles and really make the difference at a national level. Rather than the broad diffusion purported by economic theory, productivity gains actually come in powerful bursts driven by big moves by great companies. Here to help me walk through the findings is my colleague and MGI partner Jan Mischke. We'll then move into a fireside chat with Eric Kutcher, Senior Partner and North America Chair at McKinsey & Co., and Ed Bastian, Chief Executive Officer of Delta Airlines, which is one of the productivity standouts we highlight in our report. We'll finish with a panel discussion moderated by my co-author Olivia White, also a senior partner and a fellow director of the McKinsey Global Institute. The panel will also feature Matthew Slaughter, Paul Danos, Dean of the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth College, and an MGI academic advisor, and Shauna McIntyre, former CEO, Fortune 150 board member, and strategic advisor. We encourage you all to ask questions. You can use the Q&A tab, which can be found on the right side of your screen. So for now, let's get into the research. So first, just to tee this up, productivity growth is the engine of our livelihoods, and it's why our living standards increase, and it's why we can fund this very successful societies we have. But there is one background reality, is that productivity growth has actually been decelerating for quite a while now. That not to mention that in the last 5 years the US is actually having stronger productivity growth, but the pattern across the whole world is like this. It's declining productivity growth, and it matters more than ever because of things like demographics, because of things like the global balance sheet, and all the need for economic resilience we have in this day and age. We need productivity more than ever, so it really matters. Now, if we're going to look at productivity at a firm level, I need to find a way of getting all those atomic units to add up so that the total adds up to the economy. And to do that, I'm using an example here of Apple. What we do is we take the EBITDA and we add the wage costs. That's kind of a measure of the value added of the company from an economic perspective. But to get it to add up, we have to make it real. We have to deflate it back. So we're taking out price changes. And then, of course, we care about productivity, which is a per input measure. So we have to divide through by the number of employees. And so that's why we calculate that, in 2019, and our sample does run from 2011 to 2019, that Apple produced in 2019 $663,000 per worker. Now that's a lot. So there's two ways that Apple would contribute to national productivity. The first way is by making that number bigger. So they went from 593 to 663. But because that's a very high productivity number, it's well above the sector average. If Apple can grow faster, it's also contributing productivity through a mix effect. And in fact, Apple more than doubled its number of employees over this time, and its growth was by far the biggest contributor to its very large contribution to US productivity growth. So that's just the fundamentals of kind of what do we mean by productivity at firm level. So it's the gross value added of that firm divided by the number of employees. The other point is that how does it correlate with other things that we look at in the economy like wages and profits? And the answer is it correlates really, really closely. If you want to be an employee, I can tell you want to be in a high productivity growth firm. if you want to be a shareholder, you want to do the same. You can see, for example, in the top quintile productivity firms, where productivity growth was 8.8, wages growth was very, very high, 7.8, and profits per employee grew fast also. But down the bottom, wages don't really ever go that far backwards, but profits do. So what we see is that productivity gain is win-win-win. That's what we want to look for. It's what makes our economies work, and it's how we spread the gains of innovation through our societies. Okay, so well, what's the picture that we built when we made this firm level picture of productivity? And it's this one. This is not Mount Rushmore. It's Mount Productivity, and it's got a really, really interesting shape. The first thing is we get almost 80% to the peak just with 44 firms. Now this is across four samples, four sectors. Sorry, so it's not the entire economy, but it's good. It's a good chunk of the economy, and so we get to 44 firms, or about 5% of them get us 80% to the top of Mount Productivity. Then you've got the large rump of the rest of the firms kind of keeps you going across the peak. Now, those 44 firms, we call those standouts. They're the ones who make a substantial contribution to national productivity. On the other side of Mount Productivity, there's firms called stragglers. Now, thankfully, there's far fewer of them, but they also make a big difference, but in the wrong way. So just 14 stragglers explain 57% of the downdraft. By the time you finish this journey, you arrive at the overall productivity growth for this sample, which is 2.1 points. Now, it's important to also remember, like in the case I said with Apple, it's not just how fast the productivity is growing that matters, it's how fast your firm grows that matters. So if you're a below productivity firm and you shrink, you're actually helping national productivity. If you're a really high productivity firm like Apple and you grow, you're making a really big making a big contribution. Now, there's also small businesses in the economy, and what we, for 1 second, don't want to say that doing God's honest work of providing for your customers, employing people, isn't doing your bit for the economy. Far from the case. It really matters, and it all adds up. It's just that the kind of leaps that we experience as an economy come in much more focused places than perhaps we're accustomed to. And so what does that mean? It means at a national level, individual firms matter an extraordinary amount. So, for example, just Apple alone was 3 basis points of US total productivity. That's a lot. And our special guest today, Delta Airlines, 1 basis point. So that means you only need, a few dozen more of these kind of firms, and you've really changed national trajectories of productivity. In fact, we used the example in Germany that you only needed 19 more railways, and you would have doubled Germany's national productivity growth. So that means the actions of these individual firms really matter. Now, we'll come later to some of the policy implications of this, because a lot of policy is about spreading out and kind of reducing the differences between firms. But actually, it's the differences between firms that seem to make nations rich or not. So, Jan, I'm going to hand over to you now to kind of unpack, well, what are these firms and what do they do? What makes them different? That's one real advantage of doing this at a firm level, is we actually can go and look at what they did and find out what was their secret sauce. So over to you, Jan.
Thank you, Chris. First thing we did is we actually classified these standout firms into 4 archetypes. And what we see is that 60% of them are what we call improver. These are mostly large incumbent firms like German grocer Rewe that are becoming gradually more productive over time. There's another 10% that are typical disruptors, relatively small firms like apparel e-commerce firm Zalando, that scale very rapidly and improve very rapidly. There's another about 10% that we call scalers. These are the well-known superstar firms that don't actually necessarily get that much more productive per se themselves, but that essentially contribute by growing their market share at a very high level of productivity. And then there's 20%, which are a little bit maybe odd animals. We call them restructurers. They contribute mostly by going out of the way and essentially giving their market share and their employment to more productive players. Like over this period, to stay with the retail example, Sears going out of business and essentially providing its market share mostly to Amazon at a higher productivity level. So it's these four archetypes of firms, but more importantly, maybe is what do they actually do? And what we found is that, of course, one element of their productivity growth is traditional improvements in efficiency. And that's what usually people associate with productivity growth. You improve your operations, you become slightly more efficient over time. That's number 5 down here, a firm like Tesco that in response to attack from hard discounters essentially reduced costs by $1 billion in a large program annually, and this way become more productive. But what is actually interesting and in some ways stunning to see is that 4 of the 5 big ways to become more productive are much more strategic in nature and much more top-line focused and value growth focused than efficiency focused. First and foremost, it's about scaling business models that are inherently more productive. We've already talked about Apple a fair bit, but if you take a grocer like Rewe, that not only quadrupled its e-commerce market share and e-commerce being more productive than traditional retail, but also over this period opened hundreds and hundreds of penny hard discount stores, the second brand, and the hard discount model also being more productive. This is essentially what let it be a standout firm. The second part is shifting regional and product portfolios. And over this time period, particularly in the automotive sector, there was on the one hand the shift to SUVs, which customers value more, but they don't require much more hours to work to produce. But also the starting or beginning shift to electric vehicles, which are much more capital and much less labor intensive. And in this case, actually, Nissan was still a leader in this game. Of course, the type of players changed in the meantime. The third element is reshaping customer value propositions. NVIDIA is well known what it did to their GPUs and more recently in artificial intelligence, but maybe let me focus on a more traditional example like EasyJet, the low-cost carrier that improved the value proposition and with that its productivity by creating a customer experience with primary airports and customer loyalty programs and so on that was amenable to business travelers. And then fourth, and with that last but not least, it's good old scale effects, whether a firm like Zalando scaling up, whether a logistics firm Hapag-Lloyd expanding globally via M&A, or also, of course, we will look and hear in a second from Delta Airlines and the consolidation in the US airline industry. There's one more aspect of productivity growth, of course, that everyone will know about, which is creative destruction. And our firm level approach actually also shows that all the kind of news you get day in, day out about the millions of firms that entered and exit the market is probably not all that important. Because what we see is that over this 10-year period, new entry firms actually added nothing to productivity growth, just because they are too small and too low productivity initially to leave a mark. They will become very important over time. Some of them will become the future standouts, but some of them and over time. Exits in turn have been very important, and particularly exits of large lagging firms. And on the other side of the picture, then large leading firms, and those are usually the ones where competition authorities start getting worried about, gaining their share has been a really important driver of productivity growth. And that's particularly for the US, which you see here had a full percentage point boost from this relocation from exits to leading firms. Whereas in Germany and the United Kingdom, this relocation did not happen, and it cost them dearly on productivity. So where does that all leave us? There's a few things that are really different from what those of you following the literature on productivity would probably have seen before. One thing is, as Chris already highlighted, it's really those few firms that matter. And if you know that you should put that on the map, like if you're a policymaker, you probably would want to know and continuously monitor who are they, who are not, and what can you do to have more of them and fewer of the stragglers. And as a firm, you would probably want to measure your contribution. You would want to report it, particularly as a large one. A lot of them are incumbent improvers, use the power of incumbency to actually stay agile and innovate at scale, rather than assuming that it's small firms who do that for you. It is much more about bold strategic actions and response to them, and very idiosyncratic rather than some vague diffusion or imitation concepts, which has all kinds of implications, or particularly also on the talent side. Only few people can actually make those both technological and strategic innovations that really matter. How do you empower them? How do you get them? How do you teach them? It is about bold strategies more than efficiency. And of course, the topic of our time is artificial intelligence. If history and this research is any guide, if you're thinking about it mostly as a tool to increase efficiency, you might be leaving a lot of money on the table. It is about scaling business models as much or more than discovering them. So what does that mean for M&A strategies? What does it mean also for the balance between promoting startups versus scale-ups from a policy perspective? And last but not least, both within and across firms, reallocation is really important. So reallocating resources to the most productive business units within a firm, but also ensuring the market dynamism so that bad firms can fail and the leading firms can gain share is really critical. And with that, I'll hand it over to my colleague, Eric Kutcher, who is Senior Partner and North America Chair of McKinsey & Company for the Fireside Chat. Over to you, Eric.
Thanks, Jan. And much more importantly, I'm delighted today to be speaking with Ed Bastian, the Chief Executive Officer of Delta Airlines, which my colleagues at the McKinsey Global Institute identified as one of the standout companies, cited in the report. Ed's been with Delta for over 2 decades, has served as a CEO since May of 2016. Under his leadership, Delta has become a global leader in the aviation industry, known for its innovative strategies and customer-centric approach. As a very frequent traveler on Delta Airlines, I fully appreciate, Ed, everything that you've done to make the airline what it is today. So thank you for that. Your vision and your commitment to excellence have been instrumental in driving the transformation and success. We can't wait to hear your insights on the bold moves that have made Delta a standout performer and your thoughts on the broader economic theme. So with that, welcome, Ed, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Eric. Good to be with you.
Great to be with you. So I'm going to jump right in. As we said, you've been recognized as one of these standout firms since 2011. Just talk a little bit about what have been the 2 or 3 most impactful elements of your own transformational journey at Delta that allowed you to, not by accident, end up on this list.
Well, the industry, as you know, has had a long history and candidly a checkered history with respect to creating value or destroying value. And I continue to be reminded by my good friend Warren Buffett that his view of the airline industry for many years was that the capitalists should have been with the Wright brothers to kind of have shot down the concept before it ever got started. Would have saved a lot of value for the world. But joking aside, Delta turned 100 years old this year, first U.S. airline to reach 100, which we're very, very proud of. And if you think about over a much longer context, for many, many years, and those of us still that are of age still think back to the quote unquote golden age of travel when it was seen as more glamorous, more premium, more exclusive. Well, that ended with deregulation in the 1980s. And all of a sudden, in the US, I'm talking about, you had a tremendous growth in disruptors, upstart airlines, where no longer were the airlines regulated. They had to compete. And that took a couple of decades, for the industry to sort out who were going to be the winners and losers. And many, many airlines were destroyed during that period. You think about Pan Am, TWA, Hughes, Eastern, you can go right on down the list. Well, coming through that era, we knew one of the things that we had to do was make certain that we created an experience that customers were willing to value. We knew our purpose was important, was to connect the world, but we also knew that we had to find ways in which customers were willing to pay for the experience, differentiate the experience, where 15 years ago, the main reason why a customer chose an airline was price, overwhelmingly, to where today, the main reason why a customer chooses to fly in Delta is because of the experience. And so what that told you, and the research I'm glad to see bears that out, is that we created a much more reliable product, a product that has a distinct advantage to its competition in terms of being seen as a premium, that's attracted partnerships, whether it's American Express or other big airlines around the world who are part of our ecosystem, that's been able to innovate digitally and create an experience that customers no longer think of travel as just a ticket to get from point A to point B, but travel on Delta Airlines as the start of a great new journey.
And just quickly, how many employees, roughly speaking, does Delta Airlines employ?
We have 100,000 around the world.
Okay, so you have 100,000 people. How do you get the right talent to the right place, empower the 100,000 people to deliver on what you just described?
The most important advantage we have in our industry, and I'm biased, but I'm proud to say Delta is seen as the leader around the world in our industry, is our people, is our talent. It's not just the thought leadership that comes from great analysis. Even more importantly, it's the people on the front lines of our company that take a very, very technically challenging and complex industry and make it work for our customers. They're problem solvers. They're there to create a warm embrace of service. They're there to ensure when customers are traveling on Delta, they feel it. They feel differently. They feel like we've got their back. And in order for our employees to deliver that service, they need to know I've got their back. And so what I tell my employees is that my job, very simply, is to ensure that I'm getting them all the tools, the technologies, the support to be there, to be visible to them, and then get out of their way and let them do what they do 5,000 times every single day, serving 600,000 people a day, which is perform at par excellence. And it's a challenging industry. It's one that you look at every single day. There's a different chat, whether it's turbulence in the sky, whether it's some kind of political activity going on, whether it's some economic concern in a different part of the business. We fly through all of that, and we fly through that flawlessly.
You talked about tools and technology, and this whole report is about this productivity. We are living right now in a moment, I keep calling it the reimagined moment, of where new technology, AI in particular, has the opportunity to do something that probably none of us have lived through before. How do you see the role of AI and what that might do to help you further on the mission you're on and create new customer value props and new business models for the airline industry?
When I think of AI, Eric, I think of AI not as artificial intelligence, but as augmented intelligence. These are tools that enable our teams to make smarter decisions in lots of different ways. As mentioned earlier, that we fly 5,000 times a day in all kinds of changing conditions and all around the world. Better data, making smarter decision points, having more predictive technologies, better behavioral sciences. Those are all things that AI will help us inform us to how we can manage the day of flight that much more efficiently as you manage resources. We're a massive allocator of capital and resources. And the smarter we get, the better the overall productivity, the better return, the better value that we create for our customers, our people, as well as our shareholders. Secondly, there's a lot of work that will change, going into the future. We got to be very careful as to how we approach that, because the learning models aren't quite there yet, and I think everybody wants to go to the next thing. But we're in an industry where safety comes first and foremost, and so we are very risk conscious as an enterprise. I think you'll get to a point over the next several years, not next several months, where you'll find opportunities for customers to better, even more, serve and handle through our app, through Delta Concierge, which is a feature that we announced at the Consumer Electronics Show earlier this year, where customers can better serve. We can better serve them by helping them serve themselves at a much deeper level. Thinking about the app as a concierge in your palm that helps not just navigate the trip, but brings you experiences you might not otherwise see, or opportunities to make your travel that much easier. And thirdly, I think there's going to be opportunities in decision sciences. We have huge revenue management systems and technologies and people and analysts that work in that space, and prices in our industry change by the minute, many times an hour. We're not quite sure that those decision points are necessarily the right decision points. There's still a whole lot of human interaction and management that goes into play there. And I do think we'll get to a point where technologies and AI particularly will help us get greater value to customers, but also greater value back for our shareholders.
Amazing. One of the things about Delta Airlines is it's a very global airline, right? Having taken it overseas many times. The audience today is global. It's largely split between Europe and the US. What do these lessons that you've described differ at all depending on which country you're in and what market you're in, as you've seen and observed?
Well, we do travel and fly all over the world, but we're fundamentally a U.S. airline that largely takes off to many parts of the world and returns back to the U.S. That same or next day. I think the level of scale in our industry allows the U.S. to continue to be a leader in this space, and so whether it's from a technology standpoint or productivity standpoint, I think you're going to continue to see the U.S. Lead. Europe is a part of a very important part of our business model. However, the industry structure within Europe still is a bit fragmented. So you still have a lot of airlines serving their own home nations, which can't scale. And so I think the European industry is still a bit behind us and on the U.S. side in terms of being able to bring a larger impact and much greater value. I heard one of your previous commentators talk about EasyJet. That's a good example of where some value could be taken. But EasyJet and Ryanair are very much in the disruptor space. They're not in the space of growing big national or international champions. That's what Delta does. And so I think there will be opportunities in Europe over time with the proper level of political support to have some stronger airlines in Europe that we can work with.
Fantastic. All right, last question. Given the role and the place you've been on this particular list since 2011, what advice do you give to firms looking to become more productive through some combination of bold value-creating moves?
Well, I think the most important thing is for Eric is for people to, first of all, understand if they're not seen as value-creating, make sure they're confronting the facts. And we had to confront the very difficult facts back 15 years ago in our journey, where we were still struggling a tremendous amount coming not just after 9/11, but also bankruptcy and then the recession, which hit us in 2008. So we're willing to challenge the status quo and be willing to disrupt our own process, but also understand the reason why you exist, the mission you serve, the license you're given to operate by your customers and your people, and acknowledge that it's going to take time. It's taken us 15 years to get to the point where we're seen as the premium brand in our industry, and I would encourage everyone that as long as you have confidence on your purpose and you're given the license to operate, change can happen, but it may take time and may take a disciplined strategy and investment.
Ed, thank you so much for joining, for sharing all of this with us, and most importantly, for both being on this list, but for 100 years. That is no small feat, as you point out, especially in the airline industry. So congratulations to you and the 100,000 Delta airline employees around the world that have all contributed, and the many from before. I'd like to now introduce Olivia White, who is a McKinsey Global Institute director and co-author of this report, to moderate our panel. Thank you again, Ed, and Olivia, over to you.
Eric, thank you. And Ed, thanks so much. So I am delighted to be joined by Shauna McIntyre and Matt Slaughter for a little bit of a conversation. Chris introduced them briefly. Let me do it again. So Matt is the Paul Danos Dean of the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth. He's a former White House economic advisor, and he's currently an academic advisor to the McKinsey Global Institute. So welcome, Matt.
Thank you, Olivia.
And Shauna is a former CEO. She's a board member. She's a strategic advisor. So she's been the CEO of Qberg, which is a high performance or was a high performance battery subsidiary of Northvolt. She was the CEO of Sense Photonics. She's currently on the board of Lithia Motors, which is a standout. So we can talk a little bit about that. And she's got a really interesting background that spans a wide range of sectors. So from energy and mobility to industrials, and both, I would say, old and new economy firms. And I'm really excited to be talking to both of you about all of this. Matt, maybe let's start with you. Chris claimed that this piece of research upset all sorts of decades of thinking of research on productivity. Do you agree?
I do, and it's great to be here. I think the way Chris and Jan well summarized this report, it's important to understand, I think the conventional wisdom among academic economists, policymakers, I think a lot of business leaders was productivity growth, when you look at it at the level of industries or across industries, entire countries, when you look at all the firms beneath it, there was a continuum and a lot of firms contributing a little bit to the aggregate growth in productivity. And again, that matters so much because it's productivity growth at the level of countries is really what drives increases in standards of living, increases in real income, profitability of countries, that feeds into fiscal policy and so much else. But back at the level of companies, which ultimately drive those innovations, there was a presumption and some earlier research, but not as, I think, carefully done as what was done in this report, that said a lot of firms play a little role. And I think one of the most remarkable findings of this is looking at very recent data, some important countries and industries. It's actually quite different. The aggregate growth in productivity is driven by a very small number of these standout firms. And that's just, I think, a really important first order finding that all of us should reflect on, both for what companies can do, as Ed just described from Delta Airlines so interestingly, and importantly, what policymakers can do to support the productivity growth of companies.
John, as you think about this from the multiple seats that you sit in, but all focused on not academic company performance, what do you take away as most interesting?
Yeah, I think having seen it from the seat of leadership as well as being a board member and now as an advisor, I think what I find so interesting is that it's the act of being bold. And being bold is a deliberate choice. It's a choice that leaders have made, and they have held their organizations to a higher standard, and then the organization has followed. And take the Delta Airlines example. Ed really built so much productivity. Really focusing on the right people, but giving them the right training, investing where it mattered in terms of that customer experience, but then also being disciplined, as he mentioned at the end, that disciplined strategy of investment. So it's a deliberate choice. And having been in the traditional world where our former CEO at Ford Motor Company called it a layer of clay in the middle management, and then going into large tech, certainly there's more bold moves with the world of software. I say that you don't really have to amend by the laws of physics in a lot of software models, so it's easier to be nimble. But at the same time, there is a more bold mentality there. And there are perhaps pockets of clay there too. So I think at the end of the day, what I find very interesting is that leadership is a deliberate choice, and these leaders have deliberately chosen to be bold.
Maybe you can say a little bit more about how, how you translate the decision to be bold to the way that you actually think about leading on a day-to-day basis.
I think it's about setting a vision and where you believe a company can serve its customers and what experiences that you can give customers. Even in hardware, when I've delivered sensors, one of the ways we were able to be a bit of a step out, even though we were a small firm, was to care for our customers and go the extra mile for delivering and ensuring that they could use our piece of hardware in the form that was most important to them. And it was just an expectation of the team and also just the sheer might of some great talented people that were on the team that had that passion and that motivation. And that breeds on itself, that's contagious. And I think it does take that vision plus the discipline as well to make sure you abide by that vision.
Matt, thoughts on boldness?
Uh, I love that. I think I'll connect it with the academic research, what economists and what the work that you and Jan and Chris did so well. What tends to get called total factor productivity growth. So this report rightly focused on growth in the productivity of workers, output per worker, value added output per worker. Those innovations oftentimes, some people think they either magically fall from the sky, or very importantly, they only arise in young entrepreneurial firms. But the boldness that Shauna talks about, and that Ad, I think was a terrific example of, it can arise in firms of all sorts of ages. I mean, Delta has hit 100 years old. I love traveling at Delta Airlines, like I think a lot of us do. But they started on a journey that I described 15 years ago to be more bold, to recognizing the data that weren't generating the kind of innovative value that this report points out. The standout firms don't just drive gains in productivity through efficiencies. They're oftentimes innovating and creating new value in new ways for all of their stakeholders, most importantly, their customers and clients. So I think that insight is really important. It's a conscious choice of leaders to articulate a vision for a better tomorrow, and then with discipline and boldness, bring that to life with and through high-performing teams.
Yeah. No, I was
Matt,
really
and I was thinking about that as well when we were chatting the other day, and I think, it's safe to say that maybe old is the new bold, right? That it's okay to be, if you're old, it's still fine to be bold, right? So it shouldn't stop any company from setting new sights and crafting a vision that breaks away from the mold.
Well, and I was really struck in Ed's remarks, just the degree to which he talked about, not so surprisingly given what Delta's accomplished, but the degree to which he talked about a differentiated experience as the way in which they perhaps became a standout. And he talked about some things that are sort of fuddy-duddy, right? Like reliability. That's not a new concept, but it is something that shapes experience. But he also talked about the role of digital in all of that. So some old, some new.
Exactly. I think he got the table stakes right, which is on time, right? On time, reliability. Those are the bare minimum necessities of any airline. But then I think he tapped into the heartstrings and giving the experience. I know I'm nearly at my 1,000,000-mile mark, and I'm kind of proud of that, sadly. But love Delta Airlines, and it gives you the experience that honestly is a step above. He's done a remarkable job of recognizing that, yes, you spend a lot of time on an airline. And so each and every minute you're on that airline is an opportunity to shape that experience for the customer.
Yeah, Olivia, I'll just add, in the report, one of the things I really love, Chris gave the overview of Apple. There's a number of case studies and vignettes that get provided about those types of companies, Delta, Apple, Tesco, across the sectors that were looked at, where the leaders envision a way to think of new value, deliver a pre-existing value in more efficient ways. But it's oftentimes that innovation of new ways of engaging with customers and broader stakeholders that this report underscores the standout firms matter that way so much.
Now, Shauna, as you think about this, of course, part of being bold may be doing something new, but part of being bold may be deciding to stop doing something that you're doing currently. In your experience, and again, across a range of different kinds of industries, how do you think about that balance?
Yeah, I thought that the part of the data was fascinating, that the exits, the productivity gain from exits was much greater than small companies, early stage companies, the entrants. And I think that's right. We need to transfer that economic activity to companies that will be able to maximize it. And I've seen that in both. I've led growth companies, but I've also had to do my fair share of restructurings. And it's never fun. Certainly, growth is a lot more fun than dealing with contractions. But when you do transfer that productivity gain to another form, it's an important piece. So that M&A engine that we have in the U.S. is critical to then ensuring that the right technology gets in the hands of the right people who can execute it.
Yeah, I'll tell you, our research itself was very suggestive, not as rigorous what I'm about to say, but it was very suggestive of the notion that what we saw in firms also applies, for example, to business units or product lines or factories at a firm. Some will be standouts and being bold in those, but then not necessarily leaning into the ones that won't be is potentially actually a very good internal strategy.
Yeah.
And Olivia, that connects with, and you'll have it in some of the footnotes, some of the academic work and policy research where scholars can look at not just at companies, but the individual establishments within companies. There's good data sets for the United States, France, some of the Nordic countries. That's exactly what you see. So firms, even as the nature of competition in their industry changes and their innovation changes, it's oftentimes at the establishment level and product line level where a lot of that creative destruction is happening.
Do you know a question that we're getting from the audience right now? Maybe I'll throw it in and, as you think and respond, Shauna, to take this into the mix. Somebody says, it appears that many CEOs actually do hesitate to make bold moves. And maybe that's risk aversion, maybe it's a broader cultural issue. What can leaders do to help leaders broadly do to motivate CEOs or other leaders within companies to overcome those sorts of obstacles?
I think, perhaps especially in the public markets, we are so short-term minded with quarterly returns. And so if somebody becomes hostage to that, then they should declare defeat. Then there's no opportunity to be bold, to be a longer-term visionary thinker. And so some of the leaders that I've seen that I so respect are those, and Ed is a case in point, is to see beyond just the quarterly and really set a trajectory well beyond over a multi-year growth horizon that then allows everybody to lift their heads up to then be able to charge at a higher goal. I was really fortunate earlier in my career to be at Honeywell during the very early days when Dave Cote was the CEO and we were turning around businesses. And we weren't hostage to every quarter. Yes, quarterly results weren't always our friend, but we knew we needed to have this longer term strategy to turn these businesses around, and then it actually came to fruition. But I think it first takes lifting the nose of the plane, so to speak, to be able to see that bigger goal on the horizon rather than being hostage to the quarter over quarter results.
Matt, I am getting a bunch of questions about policy, and so I'll go there. What do you see as the policy implications from this sort of research?
Yeah, great question. I think if you think about how sovereign governments support productivity growth, I think two kind of sets of recommendations. One, just based on the findings and insights of this report, there's a couple things that are really important. One is whatever is the structural competition policy in a country, it really needs to be nimble enough and I think intertemporal enough to acknowledge the existence and the impact of these standout firms. They need to grow. They need to, in equilibrium, take market share from others. And I think a more static view that some countries sometimes have, where there's a snapshot of market structure at a point in time, too much focus on that is going to miss the dynamic message of the standout firms that this report has uncovered. So that's one. I think a second policy implication is, and you touched upon this earlier, Olivia, is the importance of facilitating people to transition across companies, across industries. Oftentimes for countries, that means across physical space as well. The report underscored, and Jan emphasized this, part of the aggregate growth in productivity does come from what is typically called that creative destruction. In this report, the stragglers being able to straggle and grow, perhaps exit in the market for corporate control, and the standouts being able, in their different ways, to really scale. So different countries have, I think, different strengths and weaknesses in terms of how well they facilitate the ongoing ability of all workers of all skill levels to really kind of build their human capital and retrain and make those transitions. The last thing I'll say is the other kind of category of public policy and supporting productivity. This work nicely connects with what a lot of research has long documented, which is sovereign governments at the very early stage. They can support productivity of companies in a long-term time horizon by supporting investment in early research and knowledge creation, by facilitating the growth of human capital people through the schooling system. And importantly, a lot of MGI work has documented this over the many years by allowing global connections. High talent immigration, foreign direct investment is well researched by MGI and others that engagement in the global economy is a real spur for companies to be more innovative.
One of the things that Ed mentioned when we talked about US versus Europe is the fact that, at least in the airline industries, there are many ways in which Europe is more fragmented as a market. Thoughts on that front? I mean, it ties in a little bit to the comment you just made.
It does. I think for I think kind of political economy reasons, it's still the case. Many countries in Europe do have flagship carriers, or there's just more regulation on lots of dimensions that inhibit the ability of standouts to enter those markets and engage in that value creation that this report talks about. So when you look at the industry level, again, you see a lot of variation within and across countries about how much markets are allowed to have firms when they're becoming standouts to really scale in the way that drives overall productivity.
So one thing that we're getting a lot of questions on, and please start asking questions. People have been asking them with enthusiasm. Please keep doing it. We talked about AI, and Ed said he likes to think about it as augmented intelligence. Shauna, what role do you see AI as playing in helping firms become productivity standouts in the future? How will that shift the equation?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, and I think there are a lot of good experts on that. But I think, as I see, certainly living in Silicon Valley and being around a number of early stage companies in AI, I can't, walk down a street without hearing the word AI probably. But it really is making each very deep, narrow verticals more efficient and perhaps more productive. But it allows an acceleration of connecting the dots, right? And then providing that insights. It's like a third dimension to connectivity to the internet. And we're seeing already a lot of very antiquated, age-old companies and industries that have done back processes on spreadsheets, phone calls, conversations. It's become part of their lore and their tribal knowledge. But if you can automate that, bring in insights to that, you save a lot of time in some of these very cumbersome processes. So yes, there might be some people who are displaced from that. The hope is that it can be gradual over time, that these people then in companies can be trained or migrated to other roles. I do think that coming from the world of predominantly automotive and hardware, the hardware world, AI will not replace physical hardware, right? It will replace how we interact with it. But the fact of being hands-on and building hands-on value, creating hardware, that might get more efficient, but we still need people to do that. And this is where I think the value of the skilled trades we need to take far more seriously. The schools for skilled trades, making it a profession that people want to go into, we're not talking about a blue collar world or a white collar world. It's one collar world, right? It's however you define your profession, it's one of value. And I think the skilled trades is something that we've really minimized and forgotten about over the past decades. I started started my career at a Ford plant, and being with unionized workers that were building products for me in my 20s was really impactful to understand this is tangible value being built. These trucks being built one a minute, we can't make up for lost time. So the hands-on value creation, I think, is something that is extremely powerful in this country. We have a heritage of that, and I hope that we can bring that back and then build the education systems we need to support those folks. So I think AI, getting back to your question around how will AI impact things, I think it will bring us to a higher level of standard in terms of what we expect from companies and of that customer experience. In the back end, I think these companies are going to become more efficient. So then we need to be responsible about that and think about how we are going to then serve the people who are being displaced and allow them to have a profession that is well respected and certainly gives them a good livelihood.
Olivia, can I add to that? Is that all right?
Please, yeah, please.
I will plus one Shauna's insight again. I think the need for sovereign nations to have safety nets and ladders of opportunity for workers of all talent levels to adjust to what AI might be creating. If it ends up being a more general purpose technology like the creation of a steam engine, electricity, wow, the amount of opportunity for value creation, as Ed said, through augmentation is great, and yet we're going to need to be able to facilitate people through that. And the other thing that I'll add, and one of Shauna's insights is, in connection with this report, we know in the United States, where I am, in many countries, the low productivity growth industries tend to be large service industries. It's housing and construction more generally. It's healthcare, and I acknowledge it's my industry of higher education. So I think the opportunity to figure out what tasks AI could automate to free up individuals to think about augmenting the service experience, especially in healthcare and higher education, I'm really excited about that. If I put on my hat as dean here at Tuck, we were the first higher ed institution in the States last year to strike an agreement with one of the known AI providers for every single faculty member, professional staff, colleague, and student to just kind of figure out in the classroom, in the co-curricular environment, what it could do to augment the experience. So we're learning, we're trying to figure out, like a lot of people. But this report, I think, has so much to say about the potential for AI.
And say a little bit more around the things, what do you get newly from the report about the potential for AI that, how does it open a new lens into that for you?
Oh, I think it comes back to what Shauna say, old can be bold.
Yeah.
Every firm can try to step back and say, okay, wow, what does this technology enable us to do? And what are tasks that might be automated to free up individuals? That's kind of a classic way. There is a bit of efficiency in that to envision more value for customers, clients, other stakeholders. I think that's what's really exciting. To me, it dovetails with the importance of standouts that this report has highlighted so rich. So again, we got to get the transition right in terms of labor market adjustment, which I think many countries haven't done a good enough job on in recent decades. But conditional on that, I think the standout potential it presents for lots of companies is exciting.
I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. I think one thing also that Ed mentioned that really struck me was that he had his employees' backs. And so every firm can think about how they can become standouts. They can raise the nose of the plane, so to speak, to think about the vision and get out from under the short-term mindset that so many companies are in. But what's so important is that leadership then needs to be clear to the organization that this is the direction he's going, but that he has their backs as they go and make bold moves. And the fear of failure is rampant in large corporations. So if employees recognize that the CEO is a bold decision maker, they start to become a little more emboldened themselves. So that have your back, I think, was a really important statement that he made.
Yeah. Maybe broadening that almost to the economy level, and Matt, probably a question for you. As Chris said early in the presentation, about 50% of employment, and in some places more, is with small and medium businesses. And while not all standouts are enormous, they do tend to be somewhat bigger companies. What do you see the lessons of this being for smaller firms and for leaders of smaller firms?
Ooh, great question. to me, it's actually one of inspiration. I think research shows some small businesses across the world, they're small by intention and design. It might be kind of a non-traded service where there's a clear set of customers and the firm is providing real value. But many small businesses today aspire to be the standouts of tomorrow. And so I think, to me, the message is, if you focus on the distinct ways to create value, as Chris and Jan ticked through, in terms of being an improver, disruptor, scaling, even might be a small, medium-sized firm needs restructuring. I think to me, it's the inspiration that it provides to, there can be a tomorrow where you are standing out in a different way. Again, I come back to, I think, at least a lot of the policy conversations that informs the environment in which a lot of firms operate, there's been more of a deterministic mindset around how productivity growth proceeds. And I think this report shows that's not the case in terms of the relevance of standouts relative to the stragglers. And that, I think, carries a message for firms all down the size distribution.
I think so. Olivia, I would add to Matt's comments, and as a small business leader, Sense Photonics that we mentioned earlier, in a very crowded marketplace of LiDAR, probably 80 competitors all vying for the same customers. And my message to the team was, we need to be better than anybody else in the world at one or two things, and let's not spend $1 or a minute on anything else. And so what are those one or two things? And it was clear we had a very differentiated technology, and then that paid dividends for us as we exited and were successfully acquired. But had we tried to focus on too many things, we would have failed. We had limited capital, and there was no way to invest in too many things. So focus was our way of surviving and succeeding, especially as a small company up against many competitors.
Yeah. I suppose in some sense, focusing is a way of being bold, really committing to where you focus.
Correct. Yeah.
So a question that I've gotten now from a couple different people, so I'm going to ask it, which is effectively tariffs. And do you think that they have any impact on either national productivity, but more specifically on this sort of dynamic of standouts?
I might just jump in and say, I think there are two problems here. It's tariffs and uncertainty.
Yeah.
If we had certainty around tariffs, then we could react accordingly and manage accordingly. The uncertainty of when and if and how much and will they be delayed and will it really happen this time is what keeps companies in a state of limbo, and that in and of itself is a big challenge. The inability to make decisions and to be holding off and being in this state of limbo is very challenging, very challenging for businesses.
I'll echo that. The historical record is very clear. Tariffs and other forms of building walls, they inhibit rather than accelerate innovation and productivity growth.
So maybe just to end, very quick answer from each of you. Given where we stand in the world, you're in the seat of the sort of proverbial CEO. What's the thing you take away from the report, but also this conversation? What do you go do next?
It's a great question. And I appreciate this discussion. I'd answer it the way we often do with our students here. Like, we're in the human capital co-investment industry. Despite all that may be happening in the world, I think the message of this report and more generally this conversation is, there's no better time to think about being a leader, because you can articulate a vision for a better tomorrow and bring that to life. Whatever organization, age, size, nationality, industry you're in. So I think that, to me, it's a very optimistic message.
Yeah, I would echo that. I would say I love what Eric said. Eric Kutcher said about it's a reimagined moment, right? This is our reimagined moment. We have so many assets in this country, great history of productivity, of output, of ingenuity. Taking age-old companies, 100-year-old companies like Delta, and bringing them to such a wonderful standard today is a testament that other companies can do the same. So why not be bold? What's there to lose? It's better to be bold than to wish you were.
We'll leave it with that. Shauna, Matt, thank you very much. Ed, thank you for joining us today. And thank you to the audience for sticking with us and for all of your thoughtful questions. You can access the report using the link or the QR code that you see on your screen now. And we'll also share a replay of this with all registrants, or we will have it on MGI's website in the coming days so you can share with others. And then finally, if you wouldn't mind sending us your feedback in a brief survey that will appear at the end of this session, we would immensely appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.